because you coach some like newer runners, right?
Right.
Say somebody trying to run their first marathon.
Right.
Would you give them the protocol of like 80-20, or like maybe walk us through like if somebody's trying to train for their first marathon or like PR their marathon or even qualify for like Boston or something, like run sub 3, what kind of protocol would you give them?
I'm really focused on what is underdeveloped for a lot of people in the population, and that's the aerobic side of things. And so developing that energy system. And how do I do that? Well, give yourself time to build up towards like what you're working for. Some people like sign up for a race and it's like in 2 months, and it's like they come to me and I'm like, I can't do right. Like I can't do much for you there, like the best progress that we'll see in the sport is the stuff that takes time. Lydiard would train his athletes for 2 years before they actually even got the chance to race.
Really?
And he would take guys that were like, new runners, and now they were 28-10 guys in the 6 mile. So because that's what they ran. They ran 6 miles.
So if somebody comes to you and says, I have a race in 2 months, do you take them on? Or do you say, no, you can't race?
I'd be honest with them. And because I'm like, look, man, like whatever you've been doing or whatever you haven't been doing, the cake is already baked. I can give you icing, and I can give you the best icing I got, but we need more time.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will be like, hey, I appreciate you like shooting straight with me. Like, let's do it,
Okay. So say you have the ideal amount of time. Like, was that 2 years to you think?
It depends on your perspective and what your goal really is. If you really want to just change your running and just be a completely different athlete, then yeah, that's going to take years, but if you want to run a personal best, like you could give yourself like a healthy block. I'd be thinking about something like 5 to 6 months in advance.
Okay.
I'll just to throw a number out there. I mean, NCAAs is in November, and a lot of people start training in late May when conference ends, and in June for some people.
Okay.
Depending on how far you make it.
So, the only reason I keep asking about marathons is just because I would imagine the vast majority of people listening are probably marathon runners or like looking to run their first marathon.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously there's some difference between like your specialty, 5K, 10K, what you run, and then marathons, but there's obviously a ton of crossover too, because it's that distance, that like endurance aerobic activity. Okay, have you done a marathon yet?
I ran a lot of 20 milers. I've ran a lot of 20 milers, and it's 6:10 pace at altitude, and that's just the typical Sunday, right? But I've never crossed the 20-mile line. I certainly feel like I could when I venture into that space, but just for training purposes, it's been a lot of 20 milers.
Yeah, because you don't need to go longer than that for 5K, 10K.
I mean, you could, but it's just like at that point, the quality of your workouts might suffer because you're going to need more than 2 days to recover from that, right?
Yeah. What are some of the similarities or differences between like how you would train for 5K, 10K, or like the knowledge required versus marathons or like half marathons?
You said knowledge required, like
like I don't know, like the strategy, like nutrition and strength training. I guess everything that goes into it. Because I feel like the longer the distance, the more strategy it requires. Obviously, yes, they all take something, but maybe just like similarities or differences. Like, how would you adjust your training for like what you do for like 10K compared to a marathon?
Well, whenever you're training for a marathon, you think, okay, what's the primarily dominant energy system that's in play there? And that's the aerobic system, and so obviously to advance our fitness, we want to do some threshold work, and we'll work on some of the more intense things to move the needle. But when you think about something like the 10K, okay, what's the primary energy system in play? That's really like closer to threshold, right? And so
for people that don't know what threshold is, explain this. You said you had a good definition for it.
Yeah. So in terms of applying threshold, I like to think of it as you're doing an intense effort. You're doing a workout, whether that's threshold intervals. So for example, 5 by mile, 90 seconds rest, something like that, or 4 mile continuous, just like a lot of people call it tempo. It's just kind of like arbitrary. Threshold's a more specific term. But let's say you're doing these efforts. If I'm your coach and I'm talking to you, you should be able to get out a sentence or a phrase, something like that. And if you can't get that phrase out, you're going too hard, because the goal is to run at or close to our lactate threshold. And a lot of people don't have meters to prick themselves and get their numbers and really dial that in. And even if they did, like, they wouldn't know how to do it in 60, 90 seconds. So you can't really apply it. So the talk test is very great for finding threshold,
Interesting. So it's basically the effort you can run to where you can get out, like 5 words or something ish.
Yeah. And I like to call it finding the pocket. And so just continue to increase your effort, right? And then you're to the point where it's like, okay, I can do this for a while. And then if Paul's talking to me, I'm gonna be able to get out that sentence to him or that phrase. Like, yeah, coach, I'm good. I got one more in me. Like, that kind of thing.
Okay. Interesting. And then when you get to the point where you can no longer do that, you're above that threshold.
Right. And so, it kind of depends, because there's some times in training where you're only doing 20 minutes worth of it, but then there's some that are less intense and you're doing, 10 miles worth of it. Right. And so you just kind of have to adjust and understand that threshold is not a specific pace. It's something that you can feel. And it's just, you have to really understand that, okay, this is longer. What feels like threshold is going to be a lot less intense here.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah, because it's like Garmin, Coros, all these running watches give you a threshold pace. And like, I remember even when I did my VO2 max test, they gave me my threshold pace. So you don't think that that's accurate or like a good metric to go off of? More so just like you're talking, basically?
Yeah, I think the talk test is very reliable because, and again, going back to heart rate, some people really over abuse heart rate because it's just right there and it's accessible. But that can change like 15 beats per minute in one direction or the other. And research is like, tested like the accuracy of wrist-based heart rate. And how you feel and paying it. And like my coach says, paying attention to the sensory data that your body gives you, that really is the most important thing, because effort can change based on the weather, the place you're running, the shoes that you're wearing, what you did 2 days before, what did you eat? All these different things play into how you're feeling. And not enough runners like pay attention to that sensory data that your body is like telling you. Your body's constantly giving you information, and you just have to listen, but people are staring at their watch, looking at heart rate.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. One of my biggest pet peeves is when people like, whether it's a Whoop strap or like Garmin, it's like, oh, you shouldn't run today because your recovery is low, but you feel fine. Your body says you're okay, but your watch is telling you otherwise. I'm like, nah, I'm not going to run today because my watch says I shouldn't. I'm like, dude, but you feel fine. Like, go run. You're fine. But I mean, there is maybe sometimes, like we were talking this morning, like some athletes just want to grind every day and they don't want to take rest days or anything. So maybe those tools can be good, but most of the time it's like, just listen to your body. Like, if you feel good, you're probably good.
Yeah, right. We make that joke all the time on one of my good buddies at Florida State, his name is Patrick, and he would always like tell me, "Hey man, I'm not coming to practice today. My watch said I had to rest for 3 days." I'm like, "Okay, man, I'll see you Monday." Like, say it, and we just throw that one back and forth.
It's so goofy.
Yeah.
But I guess, I mean, if you're new to the sport, that's like, if you have nothing else to base it off of, it's like maybe that can be something. But because in my experience, like, it just takes so much time and experience to like build up that intuition on how you're feeling. And like, if you've only been running for 6 months and you're trying to train for like your first marathon, it's like,
right.
You don't really know how you're supposed to feel because you've never done it before. So maybe, do you think that's where there could be a time and place for like data or like heart rate or anything? Or do you think it's like just solely based off of like talk test?
I mean, in an ideal world, you use, and this is like probably the perfect thing, you combine a lot of different factors, like, okay, maybe use the strap, not the wrist, right? And then maybe you do have practical access to lactate meters, but that's not the case for 99% of the 99.9. And then you combine that all with the talk test, and you have all these different metrics that kind of give you like a concentrated like answer.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so all hail the talk test.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. And Inigo San Milan, I follow his stuff all the time, and he's like someone I really look to, and he's talked about this before on other things, and he gets invites to podcasts all the time, and he gets as he said, I get hundreds of emails every day about like, hey, how do I do this? And when it comes to practicality, it's your body. It's right there, Yeah. It's like not external, it's like internal. You really have to like dial in to yourself and how you feel.